All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samuel?
We are in the Wheel of Time again, and this time we've kind of changed the format just a little bit. What we're going to do is, as we discussed last time, talk about motivations of the Forsaken and why they may have gone bad, and the things about them that would determine their behavior and stuff. And we're going to start with Grendel because she's fun. Now we might not do all of them because just some are more interesting than others.
Hmm.
I mean, a good dive because just how short-lived he was would be Asmodean, probably at some point, and because
Yeah.
he was kind of the oddball out too.
Well, we definitely before I looked it up when we were done last time to because I knew it was coming up. But here, March 13th, we will have to suffer through the crappy series, and so we definitely have to talk about Ishi and Lanfear, because those were the consistently the only two good parts of the series were those two.
Hmm.
Um, and as we've talked about, almost entirely because of the performers. It's not the lines they're reading; it's the way they deliver them
Well,
is so good.
I hesitate to say almost entirely because there's different directors for different episodes.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I've seen very good actors be very bad, and you could tell
Hmm.
it's the director. Uh, Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi is a great example.
Hmm.
One of the
Hmm.
greatest actors ever, and gosh, it's like nails on a chalkboard listening to him talk in at least Phantom Menace for sure, but the
Hmm.
prequels.
Yeah, yeah, and he's I know he's been nominated. I can't remember if he's won Oscars, but he's won awards for his
Hmm.
acting, and deservedly so, because he's been in you know, some really great roles. So that is true. Uh, as I was looking through stuff and thinking about what we are going to talk about today, it suddenly dawned on me is I uh I subscribe to a couple of Wheel of Time channels on YouTube, mostly just for shameless plugging. If I see something where I think, hey, I can throw a link to our episode, maybe we'll get a view or two by making a comment here. And I've had this thought before about other like specialized channels of how do you make a whole channel and like put up enough content to do this as full-time work for something so small, and yet then we keep finding stuff. So
Hmm.
for instance, what I was ranting about before we started here, and I think this is really interesting, is it suddenly dawned on me, and I went to the list of point of view chapters on the wiki to double check this. And remember when Samael and Grendel are forming their alliance, and Samael gets the better of her, and he's very proud of himself of how he was able to do that. We never get her point of view again until after Samael's dead. So we don't actually know if he did get the better of her.
According to the
Jordan
cheat
leaves
book,
that a mystery.
according to the cheat book, he did.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh,
Well, that's a little annoying because I liked the mystery
yeah.
to me that said, "Oh, Jordan, you sneaky little SOB, you got us again," because you know, without the confirmation from the cheat book, all we have to go on are Grendel's reaction and Samael's analysis of that reaction, but we don't know if it's actually true.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and skip to that part. Thus, she this is talking about how, unlike the other Forsaken, she actually was trying to manipulate her way into killing Rand
Mm-hmm.
because she just thought that was the best thing for it. But she wanted it. She wanted to pin it on Samael.
Mm-hmm.
So that was her plan. She actually liked Samael versus the other ones, but he was also the closest to her, so the easiest to use. Which,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll get to some of the female
Mm-hmm.
traits there. But did I just get it canceled already?
Oh
But
no.
it specifically says she aimed Samuel at Rand, but was caught by Samuel in a snare. And although her own snares were working, she found herself forced into aiding him. far more than she wanted to, even having to follow his lead and most of his orders. So that, I mean,
Okay.
I mean, slightly by implication, but it's a very strong implication that she could not get out of it because he got her.
Yeah.
He got the
Yeah.
gotcha.
And since we don't actually get her point of view in those situations, like she's clearly annoyed with the way he's acting and the way he treats her
Don't
when
we get
she
her point of view with the trick boxes?
no, that's all his point of view.
Oh, I thought we got her point of view, and then he told her he just made up that name for the boxes.
And no, that's his point of view, and she's clearly him and the Watcher, who we intuit is um the first appearance of Moradin, um, spying on them to see what they're up to.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I'm with you on that now, but I still think there's a strong case for that being Scheider Heron because that was my first thought in my first meeting of the Watcher.
his to me, his point of view is too human.
Hmm.
So that's why I think it's not. Plus, he's wearing basically the beta version, the original Warder cloaks.
Hmm.
Scheider Heron wouldn't need to do that. He just stands in a shadow and you can't see him
Okay,
as
yeah. So
Murdral.
so yeah, I think you pulled me away from
But
that theory. But I guess my first thought of being Scheider Heron was we didn't know Morden yet the first time you read the book. So you're trying to
yeah,
figure out who it is.
but that's why I think it's the tease, and then you're supposed to post hoc infer after you finally meet Morden that that's who that was. Which is a thing Jordan would do, which I loved, is he would, introduce a mystery and then never explicitly tell you what the answer was. He would just give you the answer, but you had to connect the dots. And that is why I had this thought and I liked it. And I'm kind of annoyed that the cheat book explicitly tells you no, Samuel got the better of Grendel, because I like the idea that at least within the books, it's not really clear. It certainly seems like Samuel got the
I think
best,
it's more clear than that she
but
killed Asmodian. But
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Um, so anyway, it, but it still works with her character and makes her really interesting that um someone with this degree of intelligence and ego, because of that intelligence and ego, could be manipulated by a lesser, if you will. I mean, he's still a brilliant strategist and tactician. We know that. Not only are we told that, but we see that. So I know I'm not as smart as you. So um how do I beat you? It's on my brain because we were just talking about it. There's a great Star Trek: The Next Generation episode, um, where there's this guy who's basically a brilliant chess master, and I think it's Riker asks him for a match, and he beats him in a blink of an eye, and then he asks for a rematch later, and he frustrates the guy so much he quits because Riker realizes, as he says, I knew I could never beat him. I'm not as smart as him. So I just played to not lose. I just played for a draw. And that beat him. Which
Mhm.
is kind of what Samael, you could intuit is kind of what Samael is doing is I can't beat you on your terms, but I can manipulate you because of what those terms are.
Mhm.
Which let's get into that of who is she, and where did she come from so that he was able to do that.
Yeah. So now Harriet and what is it, McDougal? Yeah, Harriet McDougal and the other authors of this cheat book should get canceled because they open with her section as a woman. So
Oh
we have to
no.
define that. Could have been post-op. We don't know. We don't know what they were doing in the Age of Legends. You know, we don't know if they could use the one power for that. Oh, you don't like you here
Why are you doing this?
because I hate you. Uh,
All right.
a woman whose name in the Age of Legends was my old tongue is not going to be right. Kamarile Muridim Nindar. I don't know why they overcomplicate these names. She became one of the Forsaken, no duh. Her strength in was the level of 3 plus 10, which, if you want to think of that by their system here, think a little bit stronger than Nynaeve. One step stronger than Nynaeve. Nynaeve was one step stronger than Mohidian. She's one step stronger than Nynaeve. So if you want to think of the power
Hmm.
differential there. Stunningly beautiful, lush and ripe, with long sun gold colored hair. She was known around the world, famed and loved, if apparently more often by people who had heard of her than those that knew her. Before going over to the shadow, she immersed herself in curing those with mental illnesses, and this is key here, that power and healing could not touch. So she was working on mental illness in like the traditional, like we do way.
Hmm.
Uh,
Which I love that again. Did he know or did he intuit um, that there is a physiological component to the brain? You talked about this when we talked about altered carbon.
mhm,
Is the your big criticism, and you thought they were going to do something more with it? Is you know the oh, I just brain farted on the character's name, but he's not a smoker, but he can't stop smoking because the body he's in belonged to a chain smoker.
mhm.
That would change you. That is something they don't really deal with in the series, at least. I don't know if anyone out there has read the books, but there is a physiological component. That's why we have psychiatrists, but then also there's another component there that's not purely physiological, which is why we have psychologists, because you have to approach from both angles.
Which leaves open two things that is not explicitly said in this or in the books themselves. She's one of the best with compulsion, and she's so good with it and so subtle with it, and but at the same time, the fact that her profession was dealing with those with mental illness sans the power and healing implies one of two things: that either her skill with compulsion was completely unrelated and she probably honed it when she's decided to go bad, or she knew something all along and was successful at what she did because she figured out a way to do it with the power and just didn't tell anybody so she could be famous and lauded by everybody. So
There's
there's
something I
there's
hadn't
two
thought
things
of.
that are not explicit from any of the literature, but they're two possible real
See,
possibilities.
where I thought you were going is that her intimate knowledge and experience with human psychology allowed her to be much more adept at compulsion than anyone else.
That's
But
what you would assume, but by the
yeah.
first posit that, and then it wouldn't, because her depth of knowledge of psychology were things that you couldn't touch with power.
Mhm.
So
Presumably, though, I mean, if Nynaeve can see compulsion on someone, even, well, no, because the time we see her doing it, it wasn't Grendel who put on the compulsion.
mhm.
So we don't know if Grendel is so skilled that she could make compulsion that you couldn't detect.
I was about to say yes, it was, but no, it was because Grendel had the other person put the compulsion on.
She
Yeah.
had not Masana, I'm brain farting. The dude in the chick's body.
Oh, Halima.
Halima. Yeah, she had her do it. And then she got bail fired, and that's why Round thought he'd won.
Hmm.
So we actually don't see that I can think of. I don't think we see Nynaeve delve someone who had been compelled by Grendel.
Hmm. Now,
Um,
from her profession, you could posit that that's why she was so good at the manipulation game.
I just had a thought here of when she is messing with the great generals, she is doing it from inside the world of dreams. Is she even using the power on them?
Didn't uh Lanfear Sindane say she was making a weave? She was
Okay.
using compulsion. Didn't she specifically say she was using
Okay.
compulsion through the
She,
dream?
she might have, I don't remember, but it
Because I
just
think she
occurred to
told
me.
Perrin what she was doing.
Yeah, she told him what she was doing, but I would have to go back and look and see if she actually talked about compulsion or channeling. Um, because it just occurred to me that maybe she wasn't actually using the one power and she was able to create compulsion
Through
just with the strength of the dream world.
Mhm.
that would be something interesting of would that even work? Or once you're gone, it would be like trying to take something from the dream world into the real world and it's gone because it was in the dream world.
Mhm.
Anyway, keep going.
She was also a noted ascetic. So I have the definition of that here for everybody. An ascetic means practicing self-denial and living simple life, often for spiritual reasons. So it describes someone who practices self-denial, uh, something that is harshly simple or austere, and so you might describe a monk, scholar,
Hmm.
or even a diet as ascetic, right? Or even it comes from the Greek word, which means subject to rigorous exercise or hard working. So basically, sacrificing something in the moment for a higher good. And they say mostly spiritual reasons is why you see it, which is funny because you had talked about listening to Peterson on Modern Wisdom, and I listened to that the 2023 episode again, and they talked in Williamson brought up monk mode, that this concept amongst guys. You go monk mode, and
Hmm.
basically you take time and you give up all other worldly things and focus on improving yourself for a time. But there's a healthy way of doing it, and then there's an unhealthy way of doing it. And I think we're going to think that that is part of the underlying motivations, because the healthy way you do it is you kind of get in shape and you dopamine cleanse, and you get you figure out which are the bad relationships, which are the good relationships, and all of that, and then you come back into the real world as a better person. The unhealthy way of doing it is you just basically the unhealthy part of self-care, where you go all in on this thing, but you also doing it in a way of that's just self deprivation to an extreme. So you're also missing out on everything good in life.
The self-flagellation that people and especially monks used to do, especially during the Black Plague, it was especially prevalent because it was thought that, well, this is happening because it's a punishment from God. And you're talking about, I've referenced this before, but just think about the, we think about the rapid rise of technology in the past 100 years. I mean, we went from, 19, whatever it was it 12? I'm trying to remember when Kitty Hawk was, but anyway, in less than half a century, we went from the first powered flight to landing someone on the moon.
Hmm.
That's a ludicrous. Okay, well, think about this in the terms of medicine of Calvin Coolidge, his son, the president of the United States. His son died from a blister. I don't remember which one of his sons got a blister playing tennis and it got infected and he died of sepsis. This is in the 1920s. That's not that long ago. I mean, we're building the Empire State Building. We have radio. The film is starting to become a thing. So not that long ago, and a guy died. One of the son of one of the most powerful men in the world died of a blister. So to your point about the unhealthy, how unhealthy do you think it was to scourge yourself during the Black Plague in the 1300s? That's not healthy,
Let's
guys.
stick to just the mental health part of it. The what happens to the ones that overdo it, a lot of times they come out of it and have a moment where they kind of wake up, almost like a schizophrenic having one of their moments of reality, and they they completely rebound because they realize how much over deprivation they did above and beyond for zero result, because they did it so hard they got negative result. And so basically they get bitter and angry and mean. So let's go on with her. So just put a pin in
Yep,
that
yep.
thought. Okay. So there's already a rebound possible effect there. But not only was she an ascetic, living a spare and simple life, but preaching to others that they should as well. The reason that those who knew her often did not like her was that while in public, she called for a sparse life, and her calls for a sparse life were moderate. In private, she was inevitably abrasive and cutting towards anyone who did not live up to her standards of the simple life. So now we're seeing an authoritarian bent. This is how you should do it. This is
Hmm.
why. Now, what I'm going to put implications in here, not in the book. So we'll continue on with that. But why was she an ascetic? Why was it a virtue? Well, let's look at the religiosity of this of Randland. It's the creator, right? The
Hmm.
creator, and everybody knows about the Dark One. Well, now we're in a day and age where nobody knows of the Dark One still, the Age of Legends, because it there. I don't even think there's mention of him until the bore is open,
Hmm.
and so she's living this life because it's the way you live under the light of the creator. So she has a very religious attachment to that. So okay, so now back to the text. Within 10 years after the drilling of the bore, she reversed all this completely. So now we've got a massive traumatic effect that says, oh, the creator isn't the only thing out there. So we've got possible, so that could be the spur, the pinnacle moment of I've been doing all of this for the creator. I've been doubling down in my cult of aesthetics for this thing that wasn't the only power out there. Boom.
And then talking about the rebound is I was looking through the wiki entry on her, and I didn't remember what her name meant. And in the old tongue, Grendel means vessel of pleasure. So, boy, that's quite the polar opposite of the extreme ascetic. The other
Hmm.
thing that occurred to me, the other, you know, Jordan, you cheeky little master here, because I don't know if this is on purpose, but with so much of what Jordan did, I suspect it was, is boy, don't we have an interesting parallel here. A compare and contrast Grendel, the extreme ascetic, the no one can live up to her idea of her moral code. Everyone falls short. Who does that remind you of? And
Everyone
is also incredibly good looking physically.
naive.
No, not Gawain.
Oh,
the the
Galad.
the
Galad.
one who actually turns out to be the good one. Why? Well, because he understands, and this is why he grows to become such a compelling character at the end of the series when you actually get inside his head, and he starts to grow, especially when he re-encounters his mother, stepmother, no, actual mother. His mother, Morgase, is uh no wait, yes, stepmother, yeah, because he was, yeah, because he's Rand's life.
Migraines.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, and she helps him. I think that's it. That's important that I didn't really focus on when we were talking about it is the foundation was already there because he had already started to make these steps in his own mind. And she just kind of, much like with Tam giving that last lesson to Rand when they were sparring, she just kind of gave him the last little bits of knowledge and helped to guide him along of, this is how you make this next step of you you can have this moral code, and if people fall short, it's not necessarily because they're not good or they're not strong enough. They're just different.
Hmm.
And that's okay. And in fact, that's a good thing. It's good that not everyone is like and two good people can look at the exact same situation and come to totally different conclusions, and that doesn't mean one of them is wrong, and that doesn't mean one of them is evil. They
Hmm.
can still both be good people. That's the entire lesson she is trying to teach him with Perrin. Somehow that was totally lacking in Grendel. And that is why that pendulum swung so hard to the other extreme, because something in her was lacking, that she could not make that journey or would not make that journey of self-discovery that Galad made.
Hmm.
and yet they're so incredibly similar. And I hadn't thought of that before of, oh, you have these two on the outside very beautiful people, and once upon a time they also lived very similarly.
Yeah, I think another difference with Gala though is it wasn't as supernatural.
Mm.
It was more of just being exposed to the real world.
There's definitely a school of hard knocks that goes along with
Yeah,
Galad.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that that plays a big role because if you're doing all of these things because of a supernatural ideal, because of your idea of what the creation and everything is all about, and you realize that that's not the story, or at least not the whole story,
Hmm.
that's going to hit different than I did these things because the rules are this and the rules are that. And oh, now I'm in the real world and nobody cares about my fucking rules. You know, that's a little that hits a little different
Yeah.
because
That's a
one
good point.
allows you to say, I can still be just and virtuous in this new environment. I just have to understand things a little more. The other one is you're given a binary. I'm either going to keep being good and fight for the good, or I mean, there's a lot of power with that thing I didn't know about. And we already have a bit of authoritarian nature in her with her private
Hmm.
actions. And
There's also quite probably a good chunk of ego there that you touched on of is how much of her extreme asceticism was this is the right way to live, and how much of it was look at me and how virtuous I am.
I'll use a different word, identity.
Hmm.
Her fame, her audience capture was how much of her aesthetic blowhardness was because that's one of the reasons everybody loves me.
Again, contrasting with Galad, what led him to the children in the first place was their moral code, their scripture, if you will, as he started to read the book of light, and talk with the children who were there at Tarvalon. It already fit the moral code, or it fit the moral code he already had.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that is why he was able to grow within it, is because he came from a place of well-founded morality in the first place. And so he wasn't corrupted by the culture of the children. He, in fact, made their culture better because he was able to take that core of morality he already had, plus these words of wisdom in the Book of Light, and say, no, I think you're applying that wrong because.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, the foundation was always already there, which is how Morgase was able to help him take those final steps to really become a true and good leader of the children, and an integral component to the side of the light in the last battle. Whereas something in the core was already rotten with Grendel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Incidentally, there's some great art on the wiki page, some various fan art and from some different sources, giggity, of Grendel, um, on the wiki page. And um, where is it? Yeah. Okay, so now this one, I don't know how much of this is speculation from the authors of this entry because it doesn't have a citation for it, but the way they phrase it, and I'm wondering what it says in the cheat book of, here it is. There is no evidence that Nindar's change of character was influenced by the shadow, although she was the second of the Forsaken to swear her vows to the Dark One. Rather, it seemed that she realized that the world could and would never live up to her moral standards. Thus, she became the exact opposite of those beliefs, wearing the most fashionable garments and taking the most perverse sensual pleasures. She remembers her first steps toward the shadow being full of pain. I do remember that from the book, her thinking about that, because we
Hmm.
talked about the pleasure and pain bit there, and uh, Demandred not wanting Shidar Heron there when the pleasure and pain overtook him in the Dark One's presence when he went down into um, Shao Gul. Um, but I find that idea interesting that the world could and would never live up to her standards. So to hell with it all.
Hmm. Yep. Which is that rebound because her standards were based on something deep within herself. And when that thing deep within herself was not reinforced by reality, again, coming out of monk mode and saying, I did all these things,
Well,
I'm bad. Oh, I did nothing and I
and
reversed
back to
my.
the term you
Yeah.
preferred of identity. So much of her identity
Hmm.
was wrapped up in this thing, which turns out to be a house of cards.
Hmm.
And so it all just comes tumbling down. Okay, so now what? Well,
Well, and
swing
within
back
10
the other
years
way.
is still a long time. You know, how much of her fame and her notoriety started to go away as more and more people went to the dark
Mm-hmm.
as things went back then.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically, she was the embodiment of the Age of Legends, which had become this utopia. And
That's a
as
good point too.
after the bore was open, more and more people started becoming hedonic and going into this. That's why the Dark One was gaining power because it was the people in there. It wasn't the bore itself. So,
Yeah, well, so I talked about this when we got to the point in I think it's at the beginning of Memory of Light because it's we finally get some Rand point of view after his epiphany, and I don't remember if he's talking to Min or Avienda. I think he's talking to Avienda about how we speaking as Luce Theron, speaking as someone who now remembers living through the time, we thought we lived in a utopia, but we didn't actually. We thought the shadow broke our society. All it did was widen the cracks that were already there.
mhm.
And Grendel is such a perfect illustration, a perfect avatar for that. The micro for the macrocosm of the society. She's just kind of the extreme example. But to your point, that was already happening. We don't get a ton of details, but what we do get about the Age of Legends and about what happened after the Boar is there was this period where things were what the heck just happened and what is going on. Once the Dark One was released from his prison, or the Boar was drilled into his prison, the War of Shadow didn't begin immediately.
Mm-mm.
There was a period where society began to spiral downward, and then at some point, the Dark One revealed himself, the Shadow revealed itself, and people
Yeah,
started openly
I
swearing to the Shadow.
I don't even think the War of Shadows started until the Dreadlords were set, the Forsaken were set. And so we get a little bit of a timeline here. Within 10 years, she reversed all this completely. And then some years after, she became the second. So she reversed
Yeah,
her behavior first.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then she became, then even years later, she went over to the Dark One.
And that makes a lot of sense with this idea of what her psychology would have been of she's already disillusioned because no one can live up to her standards, and now she's seeing as society begins to become more and more hedonistic and degenerate
The
of,
standard has changed.
well,
Yeah.
what the hell, why am I
Yeah.
denying myself when more and more people aren't just not living up to my standards, but they're going in the polar opposite direction? So screw all this.
Well, and let's go to her targets, her pets. So the
Yes.
thing about her pets are it's just being beautiful isn't enough. You have to be a person of power. So let's rewind back to her ascetic days. These are also the people that she would be the most upset with during that time because the
Mm-hmm.
people who have wealth and status and all of these things would be the opposite of those that live the ascetic life, right? She was famous, but there's no indication that she had wealth or any of that. she was celebrated for it. So basically, she had fame without the fortune. And because she couldn't have the fortune, she would have to give it away to live that life. Otherwise, she would have been exposed.
Again, contrasting with Galad, is one of the things we see about him is he lives very simply when he doesn't have to, given his position of power and the wealth that goes along with it, plus the fact he's a freaking prince. But when it's brought up, he kind of says, look, I'm not going to look down on anyone for having their creature comforts, but for me, I want to live I want to live as much like my regular soldiers as possible because. And Matt says something similar of, look, I if I don't know what my soldiers are going through, then I don't know how much I can push them before I break them.
Mhm.
And so there's not just a more for Gala, there's a moral component to it, but there's also very much a strategic motive of I need to be physically in tune with my soldiers as much as psychologically in tune with them. So there's no judgment there from him. It's, look, this is the way I'm going to live because. Whereas with her, there's this strong implication that there was already resentment for the fact that she lived this way, but other people in her position didn't.
Mhm. And then now I've completely switched my behavior. They're going to be the first to suffer
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because they were
But
getting this when I was denying myself.
so you hinted at, I think this is also a lead into the authoritarian nature of which getting us canceled again. We talked about how women lean more towards authoritarianism in general already, but there is a, again, swinging the pendulum all the way over and turning it up to 11. She really delves into it because beyond her pets having to have positions of authority as well as being physically beautiful, the and you see this when she's talking to Samael. It's hinted at before when others talk about her, and you see it when she's showing off her pets to Samael. It's not just that she is indulging herself, but in her mind, she's making society better
Mhm.
because you're going to be put in your place, and I'm the one who's going to determine what your place is.
Well, and I would actually contend with something said in here. It uses the word see, she was perhaps the most subtle user of compulsion in all its variations. I
Mhm.
have to disagree with that because she's actually very heavy-handed with it. She gets complete authoritative control over her pets. Whereas look what Robin did. Robin did with Morghese was subtle. She still was herself, just herself in love with him.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, that's how she was able to break free
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't so she wasn't locked within a prison. It was a kind of hypnosis, which is, as I understand it, the reason hypnosis works is because all you're doing is encouraging something that the person has a predisposition for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't hypnotize someone to walk off a cliff unless they're already suicidal.
I don't think that's been tested. But
No,
I
I
would
don't
like to
think you
see
could test that
I
one
would like to see the
specifically.
IRB request for that.
Yeah.
But what we do know is you can implant false memories with hypnosis easy.
Hmm.
And that would be going against what's actually there because it is a brand new memory. Uh, Now, how far that can stray from reality, I don't know, and I don't think we can study that either. So you might be able to plant a false memory of child abuse, but you wouldn't be able to do it saying you were abused by a completely different family you never knew. I don't know. I don't know how close to reality it has to be, but yeah, you can go against nature a little bit. But
Well, to the point being, with what Ravine was doing, we see from things she says and from her points of view that, and Tom talks about this of being a queen is a very lonely position. and she's still a woman. And that's why they had a relationship, is because I was able to treat her as a woman
Mhm.
in private, and she was still the queen in public. And that's essentially what Ravine took advantage of, is here is someone who has this deep
Need for human
physiological and
contact. Yeah.
psychological need for companionship, comfort, love, and he gave it to her, or so she thought.
Yeah. Well, and this is, let me break this down to something we all should know if we're older than 16. Let's say you don't want to admit it about yourself, but everybody's had a friend where they're dating somebody and the red flags are, flying from the rooftops, and you're like, dude, what? And then they get mad at you for bringing up the red
Pointing it out. Yeah.
flags. And that's basically what he did in spades. He made her so 16-year-old in love with him that nothing, no flag he threw up was going to get in the way. And
Hmm.
so his other things that he did were things a normal person would do if they were taking your power, but anything that would have been a red flag, like including the other person in the relationship, or all of those other things that he did, or firing her guard, all of those other things, or having her fire her guard, I should say, but all of those other things just didn't register because she was so flowing with the juices of love, uh, of the honeymoon, the eros love, right?
Contrasting with what Grendel does, which is that it is going to be very much against Morgase's nature to be a naked acrobat
Yeah.
performing for Grendel. I mean, that's why Grendel's. I mean, I don't remember who talks about it, of how her pets aren't useful for anything else. Like you couldn't break that control, and if you did, they would just be a drooling vegetable.
Hmm. See, that's why I didn't
Because,
like the word subtle there, because
in fact, I think maybe it's Lanfear is the one who makes that comment. I think it may be, and you see the subtlety of Lanfear at the very end, which
Mhm.
again was something that jumped out at me because we're talking about Grendel. I was thinking about compulsion, and then it just dawned on me. Oh my gosh, there's another prime example of the bleeding of the material world and the world of dreams. How is Perrin, a non-power user, able to break Lanfear's compulsion at the end? Oh, because the worlds have merged.
Hmm.
And because he has the power in the wolf dream, he's able to break that compulsion. He's able to see through it. And he uses how? He uses the techniques of the wolf dream, of hold on to what is most important, what is most real, which for him is Fail.
Hmm.
And that is how he's able to break that compulsion. And hers is very subtle, you know. And she is pushing him against his nature, but in ways that manipulate his nature,
Hmm.
like using his own
Yeah,
inner.
because he still is man, and she is
Mhm.
trying to make him want her as his lover. So he is still man. She is still beautiful. He is all of those things.
But also because what are we going to do? It's not just, hey, kill your best friend and get this hot body. It's, and we are going to be the heroes because we're going to control the dark one, which will be good for humanity. The light will win because we will cage the dark one and control him ourselves. So she is incredibly subtle. And I think she is the one that I'm remembering. There's a scene, someone talking about Grendel and her use of compulsion as heavy handed. And
I
I think it
might
is Lanfear.
I might have to eat crow here because of a later paragraph,
Oh,
and she talking about her pets, and then Samael here in a second. She used compulsion on her pets like a bludgeon, so they would worship her beyond life. Samael noted that this often made others forget her skill and subtlety with compulsion.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember that now. Yeah.
Yeah, so
So she could be subtle when she wanted to.
yeah, she was one of the best ever at manipulating the minds of others, which this is where the psychology comes in because she gets a lot without using compulsion. She doesn't use compulsion at all on any of the Forsaken, but she's the master manipulator of a lot of things. In fact,
Yeah,
Samael's the only one that called her on her bullshit.
that's a good point. Yeah. Um, probably because he's the one that seems to know her best.
I think also because, like you talked about the Riker example, he's also the least manipulative one of the group.
Hmm. Hmm.
So because she's playing them like they're all playing a game. He just walked in the door and didn't play the game. And then because he did that, oh, she's doing this thing that everybody else is doing, but she's doing it better.
One of my favorite movies, The Fifth Element. Bruce Willis walks in and just shoots the guy in the head. Anyone else want to negotiate?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll take back that 10 minutes of conversation we had about her not being subtle. But
She can be subtle, but I think that is a um it's not take back. It's put it in the context of how far she swung in the other direction, and how extreme her transformation was, is that she doesn't have to do this, but she wants to.
mhm.
Because as Samuel notes, she is very skilled. She can be very so. And the thing that popped into my head when you mentioned that is Jane. I mean, Jane's not a drooling puppet.
Mhm.
She We don't know exactly what she did and why she did it, and sent him off
Well, we
to
have it here
basically be a
because
mole
the reason
with
it brought
Matt.
that sentence up is because it talks about it amused Grandel to keep Jane Farstrider and use him. A bit of Ishi's handiwork, a souvenir of the first move in the Dark One's grand design. Also, for a time at least, she really did think that his age and battered appearance set off and heightened the beauty of the other servants. So basically, she kept him around because it made her other servants look better.
Hmm.
You know, it's also why a lot of beautiful women have try to make sure they're the most beautiful one in the group so they look
Hmm.
better. But
Hmm.
we'll get to just female machinations here in a second because she's a master at two of them. She used only the most subtle degrees of compulsion on him and sent him to Ibodar on the off chance that there might be something of her suspicions on an Angrel in that place, which was sought for by Samael. So she was using him as like a scout. So
Yeah.
she couldn't have him as just a puppet that drooled.
And he was clearly mostly himself, but as he talks about when we first get the point of view, there are gaps in his memory, and he does suffer from like occasional bits of confusion of where am I, who am I, what's going on. So he is probably, at least partly, because he is strong enough of character to resist the subtle compulsion in much the same way that Nynaeve breaks Moghidian's compulsion in a similar fashion early on. But then also because it's so subtle, because she needed him to still be him in order to be a mole, in order to be a scout. Um, so yeah, she could be very subtle, but she didn't want to be. And we definitely see that by the end, where she is just sledgehammering people's minds to make them her thralls.
Hmm. So it talks about her using manipulation, how she wasn't always she would always support the winning side, but she would try to take advantage from within. She played the under the surface politics pretty much better than everybody. She would oppose no one, openly at least, unless she was relatively certain of the win. So one of the things I listened to in preparation for this was Dr. Tanya Reynolds on Modern Wisdom talking about how uh, female intrasexual competition goes and the gossip game. What is the advantage of the gossip game? The gossip game is you can attack your opponent with almost no chance of exposure to yourself because it's basically people just get to talking. But someone has to start the talking, but usually nobody knows who started the talking. And so she was a master at that, and we see a lot of examples of her doing that. But then there's also the bless your heart game. You know, the I so like say, oh, I'm I'm really worried about Susan, because she's sleeping with a lot of people lately. That is different than saying, I think Susan's a slut,
Yeah.
right? So you come at it from that angle. So now let's look at her history where she's famous and world renowned. But why is she famous and world renowned? Because of her altruism, because of her
Mhm.
helping of people. She takes that step that women don't grab. Women backdoor. So she becomes super famous by helping people and being and living a simple, basic life and denying herself of the pleasures. And then she works the game by basically putting a bug in the ear of, oh my gosh, Demandred's been really absent lately. I'm concerned that maybe, something's going on there with him. I'm worried that he may be taking this vengeance thing too far. It's not saying, oh, he's a
Mhm.
vengeful asshole and he's going to get himself killed. It's, oh, I'm really worried about Demandred. And she plays that game really hard.
We get a little bit of that when she's trying to justify herself with is it Moradin or Shaidar Heron who shows up
Shidar
after
Heron's the
after she
one
has to
that humbles her a little bit. Where he's
after
he's
she
the
has
one
to
that,
fl after she has to flee Eridomon
yeah,
and
Shidar Heron's the one
she's
that
hiding out.
made her have a new body.
Yeah, but before that, before her final failure is she plays the victim, but also the manipulator of, no, no, things are fine. That was unfortunate. Gosh, isn't it just such a shame that poor Arengar, which one was I can never remember which
Yeah,
one's Arengar, which one's Isengard.
Arngar was Harma.
Arengar, it's just such a shame that poor Arengar got killed. But you know, I tried to warn. I tried to warn her. I did my best. What can you do? What can you do? And that's how she's able to talk her way out of the severe punishment that comes later when she does eventually fail to kill Perrin is no, no, I've this was a setback. This didn't go exactly according to plan, but I've still got a plan here. I'm still working for the dark. I'm still one of your best tools. And in fact, I'm getting ready to kill Perrin for you. And then it's all right, you know, here's a here are your licks. Take your licks and then get back out to football practice and and then when it's okay, no, now you're off the team because you really screwed up now,
Hmm.
and that's when she gets the big punishment. But initially she's able to sweet talk her way out of it with that manipulation.
Hmm. Yeah, and I really liked that we don't get a lot of clues of this, but it is made a little more clear here in the cheat book. But talking about having other people do your dirty work and then, keeping the gossip going so that nobody knows what's going on. After she killed Asmodean, apparently the reason she didn't tell anybody about it was because she was pinning all of her mistakes on him. So this person that's not showing up to any of the meetings is the reason why she messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying I messed up and I did this. It was everybody going, "Oh, what happened here? Oh, well, Asmodean must be doing stuff out there. Can we find him? We need to get he's putting himself in danger, kind of thing."
Yeah. I think at one point, I don't know if it's her, but I think at one point someone deflects and speculates if it's Samael, if he's not really dead, if he's just in hiding. Um, I think it's when Moradin mentions that someone's been giving orders to Trollocs and it wasn't him, and he doesn't know who it was and or what they're doing. So then there's oh gosh, maybe Samael wasn't always the most subtle, but maybe it's him. Maybe he's in hiding somewhere. Um, and I think she helps with that deflection as well. Um, uh, lost my train of thought. Well, so where else were you going with this?
Well, I was
Uh,
mostly interested in just about mostly the initial motivations. You know, why would you go from who she was to what she became?
you know, we've talked about in the last couple of books, especially that um, it seems that Jordan had a much bigger plan for Grendel than initially seemed, because so much of the early focus is really on the three main guys,
Hmm.
Ishida, Mandarin, and Samael. Um, but I think that's in part because so much of the early focus with Rand is his consolidation of power, which a lot of it is martial, and those are the generals. Um, but then as the series progresses and you see just what Grendel has been up to, that I think I suspect he had a much bigger plan for Grendel than was ultimately revealed, because I don't remember if we talked about this when we were finishing up last time, or offline, that it, it's a little bit of a shame that Sanderson wasn't able to pull off Grendel with the subtlety that was needed
Hmm.
for that character. That in some ways he writes her like the other Forsaken look at her,
Hmm.
that she is kind of one note, as opposed to Samael, who gets, no, that's just the facade. Don't you dare underestimate her. I mean, we see that from his point of view when he like breathes a sigh of relief of, holy crap, that gamble paid off. I mean,
Hmm.
he was generally concerned that she would call his bluff, and ultimately he called her bluff, and he won the hand. Um, maybe you should have had thinking and bets up, because that's basically what Samuel does, is he goes
Hmm.
all in on a bluff and he wins. And he wasn't confident that would happen, but he knew he had to try, because that was the only way to beat her. That was the only way to get one over on her, is to use her own skills against her.
Well, in reality, back to my point about him being the bull in the china shop when it came to politics and machinations amongst them, that was his advantage. And he even says that in his head that they don't think I'm, you know, they don't think I'm subtle enough to get one over on them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
Yeah, yeah. He's just the goon. He's just the muscle, you
mhm.
know. Um, I wonder. It's hard to say though, because, and I'm curious what your thoughts are of. I mean, we talked about the mind influences the body influences the mind. I brought up altered carbon earlier, and we see that, speaking of Arngar Halima, we do see that with him, is we get a point of view where uh she is thinking about how weird it is that, in thinking about the previous life in the Age of Legends, now Arengar sees himself as herself, as Halima. That's just
Hmm.
who he is and has always been, because the mind, as Shaidar Heron says, the mind will adjust to the body. So is it possible that, well, actually, when Grendel gets turned into Hesselim, does it make her more one note? Or do you think she still should have been more subtle?
I think he was trying to be subtle with her thoughts of her, or voicing out her thoughts of uh they thought that taking away my beauty would hold me back from people worshiping me, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and that's consistent across her whole character, even going back to the Age of Legends. She was addicted to being worshipped,
Mm-hmm.
and she just changed tactics. And I guess maybe that I don't think she's been in that body long enough because Halima took a little while.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, if we take timelines by the book, then it took a
Year,
while.
18 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, that might be coping more than the body changing. I mean, the bitterness would be there, the
Mhm.
hatred, but actually that bitterness and hatred and coping would go away to some degree if the body and the mind merged, because then she would start thinking of herself as always that and not contrasting herself to what she just was.
Yeah, and the I think the one part he does really get is the idea that what is motivating her is I'll show you.
Hmm.
You think you've punished me, Moradin. I'll show you. So that part to me works and is fitting with her character, but she does kind of get a little bit in some of those scenes at the end. Um, she does kind of become a bit of a cartoon villain.
Hmm.
Um, of she becomes the Wicked Witch, and your little dog too.
Hmm.
She,
Now, what we would
she
have
kind of becomes
needed
that.
is longer. Of course, it was at the 11th hour when all this stuff happened, longer to see her use her non-compulsion machinations and politics with Forsaken in that body. That would have been what we would have needed to see to get an answer to your question there. How does
Yeah,
she handle not being able to just force somebody to see something different?
because the only time we see her is I'm trying to remember whose point of view it's from, is when Mihail is introduced as a new Forsaken.
Hmm.
And I'm trying to remember whose point of view it is of who the heck is this hideously ugly person. Um,
Was it
it might be
Demantius' point of view?
Malkavian's. No, I think
Boghedians?
it's Malkavian's point of view. Um, Trying to figure out who the heck is this ugly person. Um, and all we see is that she's scowling and bitter and angry, and we never actually really see her interact. So we don't know how she did or would have dealt with the Forsaken because I don't even think she says anything in that
Hmm.
meeting. Um, one of the interesting tidbits is I think that makes me think or makes me wonder uh, whose idea was this because a lot of the references, allusions, influences, you know, we've talked before and brought up Jordan in his own words saying, yeah, guys, it's not that deep, yeah, there's Brigitte. The name comes from a Welsh mythological hero, a warrior woman, but that doesn't mean that's who the Brigitte in this story is.
Hmm.
It's a reference, it's an illusion, it's a time as a circle, and so all of these stories come from somewhere. And well, who is Grendel? Without the A, you're changing the spelling slightly. Grendel is from Beowulf.
Hmm.
He's one of the three monsters that Beowulf has to defeat, and Grendel is a true monster. I mean, he is. He's been depicted in different ways in the visual medium, but he is clearly a creature of some sort. But then after killing Grendel and tracking him down to his lair, Beowulf has to confront Grendel's mother. And Grendel's mother is portrayed in film versions as I think in there. I'm trying to remember when it was, but there was a Beowulf a while back where Angelina Jolie played Grendel's mother
Mm.
because she's depicted as a shape shifting seductress. Um, and so as the wiki puts it, an argument could be made that Grendel is nonetheless still a monster whose name is used to scare children, and Jordan conflated the two characters into a single persona. Um, and again, I'm curious, was that on purpose? Was this always where Grendel was going to end up?
Mm.
To kind of bring things full circle to the Beowulf illusion of, you know, we have Grendel and then we meet Grendel's mother. Well, now we have Grendel's mother who becomes Grendel the monster, you know.
Then why don't we have
I'm
her using
curious.
Mask of Mirrors to make herself look beautiful?
Well, now that to me, I was thinking you were going to end up there and have your own thoughts on that, because that to me is interesting, and was again back to the, was this the way Sanderson wrote it? Was this the way Jordan intended it? Is I am conflicted. That's one of the points where she starts to become a bit of a cartoon villain, a bit of too much of the Wicked Witch of, no, I'm not going to Mask of Mirrors myself. I'm going to make you say that I'm beautiful.
Hmm.
I'm going to make you worship me despite how I look. I will make this the new standard of beauty. There's a part of me that thinks, no, that's in keeping with her character, of the way she is going to reshape the world with an
Mm.
authoritarian mindset of oh, what was it? There was a great SNL sketch way back when SNL was still good, where Pamela Anderson is the it was the host, and they do this kind of Dr. Frankenstein kind of bit. I'm trying to remember who plays the doctor, where she has this horrible accident, and I'm sorry to tell you, you look like this, and everyone else is horribly ugly, and so they look at Pamela Anderson and go, ugh, what's wrong with your face? And it's because the rest of the world is hideously ugly. Um, and I actually I don't remember who he was talking to, but I saw Jim Brewer on a podcast with somebody talking about it, and apparently Norm Macdonald had Chris Kattan was being a little dick, and so Norm Macdonald just ripped him a new one in a hilariously sarcastic way right before they went on. And so Brewer said him, and I don't remember who else was in the scene with him. You, our back is to the camera most of the time because we couldn't stop laughing because of how Norm Macdonald just destroyed Chris Kattan right before they went on. But anyway, uh, so if you want a fun bit, there's a the inverse of what's happening here, and Pamela Anderson in her prime, she could definitely have played Grendel. Of, no, I'm going to make this the new standard of beauty.
Make the world in her own image.
Yeah, yeah, which is what they're all trying to do ultimately, and
Hmm.
you kind of see that from the Dark One's point of view when he's showing the different possible futures to Rand. Is, I don't care which one of them remakes the world, so long as it's remade and
Hmm.
I'm the one in charge. And I so I'm I'm of two minds on Hesselum, of how that turned out. I kind of get it. I just, there's not a lot of subtlety there, but then
I
I
think the
wonder.
simplicity of is the it was a very easy it was a low hanging fruit
Mhm.
to give the fate worse than death thing, and and then to have her own tool used on her at the end.
Yeah. Um
That's really all I had on her. Just overanalyzing her motives, going into backstory, fleshing out the character for those that may have read through for the first time. And it's hard to flesh out the characters when you read through, especially
mhm,
14 books,
mhm.
other than the main characters, because you've got so many people to remember, and it's easier to read them as a cartoon version of themselves, as a character of themselves, when you're reading through it all the first time. It's really the second and third reread that you're really overanalyzing things.
Yeah. Because you can, because you're, I mean, even now, I'm thinking about things and getting tidbits and going, oh, hold on, wait a second. Does this connect to that? Is this important? Did I miss something there? So even now there's always something to go, I wonder about. Uh and again, she does become so important by the end. It is, interesting to uh dive into her motives and where she came from and why she's doing what she's doing. Um, back to the awful series, it's uh, a tease for next time of what I wanted to talk about, which is Ishamael, the nihilist,
Mm.
and why he is the way that he is. And that actor, again, there's not a lot in the script, but I wonder how much he knows the source material, because through his acting, he's able to give you the subtext and make you feel and intuit what Ishamael Balsamon is all about and
Hmm.
why he is the way that he is. Um, well beyond the words that are spoken. Um,
Well, maybe it's because to get his character, he couldn't read just the last three books. Because remember what one of my hypotheses on why all of these characters are so bad is they all seem like they're written from the Sanderson books.
mhm.
Maybe that's partly, maybe that's not reading them. Maybe that's his advice to the people playing the characters because he's the he's the expert, the resident expert for them.
Or
Uh,
was I don't think he's actually still the consultant anymore. I don't think he's involved. I
couldn't
seem to recall reading
maybe
that.
some of his podcast public statements about how bad it is has gotten to the producers,
Yeah,
but yeah, even it's too bad for him, but I really do think a lot of these characters are basically their caricature of the last three books,
yeah, that's a good point.
but you can't be that with
Um,
Ishi.
no, no, same with Lanfear.
Hmm.
Is you have to know where she started. You can't just start with what and who she became.
Hmm.
So it makes me wonder if those two especially had to go and look back, whether at the Cliff Notes versions or the actual
Well, and they
books.
they also just seem to be more serious actors to begin with. So
Yeah,
maybe they took their part more seriously than some of these young kids they got to play these other parts.
mhm, that is also true. But anyway, uh,
Even
it
the Rosamund Pike, I don't think I don't laud her as much as a lot of people like that like the series do,
mhm.
but she does have an essence of Moiraine. But I think the producers told her, okay, so Moiraine, but like modern badass. Like,
Well, but also you're the hero of the story. No, no,
yeah.
she's not. She's the one who finds the hero of the story. That's the other big problem, especially with the first season, is it's Moraine is the main character. Well, she should be the main character for the first couple of episodes,
Hmm.
but no, then there is a reason. I mean, there's a hero's journey template for a reason, and so there's a reason that after they escape the two rivers, it's not long after that they're separated,
Hmm.
because the hero needs to get out on his own so that he can become a hero.
Yeah. And after the second season almost seemed like they tried to highlight more Egwene and Nynaeve than anybody else.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I mean, Rand really gets put on the back burner in that, when he's supposed to be becoming. This is him actually becoming the dragon.
Yeah,
Where the hell is he?
and in the stories about the releases, they made it more Rand centric. It's like, well, it should have been the whole time.
Yeah. Anyway, but the reason I brought up Ishi is because I had this in listening to that uh Modern Wisdom. It's number 712. If anyone wants to go take a listen to it, Chris Williamson talking to Peterson, Jordan Peterson, and something he brought up that was kind of a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because we have talked so much about emotions aren't negative, it's what you do with them that is positive or negative. And Peterson's talks about cynicism.
Hmm.
Well, being being at least a little bit cynical is a good thing. Being
Mhm.
skeptical is a good thing, unless you believe nothing. Believing nothing is just as bad as believing everything. I don't remember who first said it, but it's overestimating your enemy is just as bad as underestimating your enemy. You know your enemy, know your terrain, and so it's along those lines of, well, let me let me think critically here. So does your cynicism lead you to critical thinking, lose Theron, especially
Mhm.
after his epiphany, or does it lead you to nihilism? Ishi Moradin. I think there that the reason it's so important to understand Ishamael is because he is the bad guy. I mean, for a time, you think he is the Dark One. Balsamon. It's the name for the Dark One. Well, no, it's not. You find out later. It's kind of the name for the avatar of the Dark One, which is Ishamael, who's the voice of the Dark One until the Dark One can act more directly
I
through
will
Shiner
use the
Heron.
term representative.
Representative. That's a
Yeah.
better term than avatar because he yeah. Um, but I think it's important to understand these motives, because that's what starts it, and then that's what ends it with the confrontation between Rand and Moradin of what what led one down one path and one down the other path.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think we'll close it out there so we don't go too long, so people will actually click on this damn thing. Uh, if you liked it, like and subscribe, all that stuff. Share. Leave your comments. We didn't have any comments from last time, did we?
No, I checked
Okay.
both our last episodes. No comments. So don't know what that means, but I hope the few of you who are listening are enjoying and having your own thoughts. Hopefully, let us know if you did, but hopefully we say something that makes you go, huh, I wonder if that means that, which would mean that, because that's I mean, that's what we're trying to do here. That's what I'm hoping we're doing.
All right. Well, with that, we'll see you next time.